Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Our topic for today is subhanallah. Wait a minute. I am my apologies. Our topic for today is the struggle for global justice continues. The struggle for global justice continues. I'm on the road, coming to our friends in South Africa and abroad from a hotel room, actually in Texas. This has been up till now a very taxing journey, but well worth the effort. Today, for this very important topic, for this very important discussion, we have a sister with us that has been with us before. Dr. Nadia Batul Ahmed is a committed Muslimah and an associate professor of law. Again, she's been with us before, and it's a pleasure to have her back with us again. Dr. Nadia, my sister, I'm having this conversation with you again from the road, and I'm on a human rights mission in North Texas. Actually, it began in South Texas, and with a janazah for a very dear friend and supporter of the Siddiqui family. He's someone who knew Dr. Afia Siddiqui and her mother and her sister and brother very well. Dr. Khalid Zaman was one of the founding members of the Islamic Society of North America and the Muslim Students Association, a brother of Indian heritage. And, he was my big brother, and he passed away a little more than 2 weeks ago, and that brought me into Texas earlier. So this has been a very taxing journey, but one well worth the effort. I'm glad I was able to make the janazah in time for our brother, and then after leaving Houston, coming to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've been here ever since. We've been here beating the drums, talking to folk. We've got a very important conference coming up, and a rally for our sister in Islam, Dr. Afia Siddiqui. So this broadcast is being pre-recorded just a few days before these two very important events jump off. But it is a very, very important conversation that you and I are going to have, inshallah ta'ala. And in fact, it's so important that we're going to play part of it at the conference, inshallah ta'ala, that we're going to have before I leave Texas. Now, with that being said, let's begin our dialogue with, the title of today's broadcast. The struggle continues. The struggle for global justice continues. I know what this title means to me. What does it mean to you, my sister?
Thank you, Brother Mauri. For me, this idea of global justice and the idea that it's continuing, it's about ongoing solidarity and the relentless genocide that is happening right now in Gaza, and how it's really a moment where internationally countries around the world are getting together to demand statehood for Palestine, as well as for justice against apartheid, as well as this relentless bombing that is happening against innocent civilians. And this is really about this idea of working against global justice is also about working in a moment where we can really confront the American empire. What happened during the 1960s and 70s was you saw massive student protests. And then as a result of that, you saw the development and formation of a broader Muslim mobilizations, especially among those who were of African descent in the United States. And to really quell that type of the activism that was happening among the Blacks, Muslims, as well as those who were African American in the United States, there was an influx of immigration that happened from other countries around the world. And so right now, when we're looking at this idea of global justice, we're looking at not just against ideas of convergence of slavery and apartheid, but also against colonialism, and looking to see exactly what is needed to confront the injustices that are occurring globally.
Well said. Well said. What's your view on what's been happening in occupied Palestine? The ethnic cleansing that predated October 7th. I mean, the Zionists and their facilitators would like everyone to believe that what the world is witnessing right now, especially in Gaza, the genocide that is taking place, and as quiet as it's kept, the heightened ethnic cleansing in other parts of occupied Palestine, that this is something that just really happened. It was triggered by what took place on October 7th, when those of us who have been following the tragedy of this occupation for 7+ decades, almost 8 decades, 76 years, we know differently. What is your perspective on what we're seeing right now in Palestine and the global community's response to it?
What we're seeing in Palestine is a continuation of a broader struggle of not just 7 decades, but also of the story of colonialism, expansion, and slavery. Like if you look at transcontinental slavery that has happened, the transatlantic slave trade, these are part of global movements that have happened. And what you saw happening with the expansion was this expansion of capitalism. And the expansion of capitalism, especially into what they called the New World, even though there was already indigenous population in the native lands, was the expansion of settler colonialism. And that was actually the first time where you had an ordering of people by race. And that hierarchy that was put in place at the advent of the quote unquote discovery of America is really what we are fighting against, where people who are from what are now considered third world or developing countries are considered less than. And so what you see happening in Gaza, it's not just a matter of fighting for land, but it's also fighting for different natural resources, including water, this beachfront property, and also the offshore oil and gas reserves that are in Gaza. And so for the past 10 years, there has been quite a bit of oil and gas discovery in offshore Israel as well as Gaza. And so there is this perpetuation of violence that is happening, especially by the United States, to allow for the transnational oil and gas companies to be able to exploit resources offshore Gaza. And the reason why that's important is because if you want to have access to the onshore land rights, if you want to have access to the offshore oil and gas rights, you need to be able to have access to the onshore oil and gas rights. And so that's where this problem has started, or it's essentially that there's no sense of what they have an international principle of free, prior, and informed consent. And so that's really just kind of thrown out the door in favor of having just mass land clearing, ethnic cleansing, genocide. And right now, we're not only seeing because the people, unfortunately, are not dying fast enough from the Israeli perspective. So that's why they're allowing for broad famine, starvation to happen. And that's why you also see the sanctions that are put in place against the UN relief agencies. And so this is something that really needs to be seen, that just the level of people and the rate that people are dying in Gaza and are experiencing disease and malnutrition is just completely unprecedented in the history of civilization.
Indeed, it is. You know, in his farewell address to the Union, American founding father George Washington, the first president of the United States, warned in his in that farewell address, he warned his compatriots of the evils that would arise from giving favorite nation status to any nation. You know, the type of status that the U.S. Politicians and policymakers have conferred on the apartheid Zionist state of Israel, for example. And there are other examples of favorite nation status of a lesser degree that the U.S. has accorded to a number of nations. One other that comes to mind right now is India, and the relationship, because of the size of that market and various other perceived interests that the U.S. has accorded to India, to its government, and the blind eye that it's turned to, the kind of outrages that are taking place there against minorities, with Muslims being at the top of the list. What's your perspective on this warning that the father, quote unquote, father of this nation, gave to his compatriots, and how that warning plays out today?
So the words of President George Washington were wise words, but they weren't well taken or well received by successive generations of American politicians. I mean, if you look right now with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, anywhere he travels around the world, it's basically like him getting up, wheels up, and then bombs away. So anywhere he goes, he says he's going to fly for peace, but as soon as by the time he's off the ground, there's already bombs out and about. And you really have to kind of question the authenticity of the U.S. diplomatic mission, because for the past several decades, the idea of peace has just become kind of an idea. And there's really just been this push towards militarism to the point it's just an addiction. It doesn't make any sense. Except that there's this constant warmongering, and there's an economic benefit for war profiteering as a part of this. And this has also kind of led into other spaces. So the same way you had the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb, there was connections between government, academia, and industry, with the public sector and the private sector, and you see the same thing happening right now. And so, for example, you also see the tech sector as a part of this space. You also see like the role of artificial intelligence and what is happening at this moment. You also see we're witnessing this rapid militarization that's happening, and at the same time, you have this really expansive climate crisis that is happening. Just a week ago, 300 people died in Afghanistan from flash floods that were happening. And then you have, at this point, over 40,000 people have died in Gaza. And then you have large swaths of people who are dying from malnutrition and starvation, not just in the Middle East, but also all around the world. Even if you look in the United States, for example, in cities like Denver, where I lived, over like a decade and a half ago, there's large amounts of homelessness that is happening. So this problem that we're seeing is because how much money is being spent on war. And if we wanted to actually decrease the military budget by 8%, it would take about 25 years to pay off all student debt in the United States if we did that, and we would have better outcomes and resources. And this is actually what happened when the U.S. was fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq for 20 years. You had other countries like India as well as China that were really kind of developing their middle class and advancing. And then this idea as well about what's happening in India being a little bit different because, for example, India is growing as a population, so it also needs more energy resources. India doesn't have enough indigenous natural resources to supply its own energy needs. So what you see happening is India now doing what's considered to be like reverse colonialism. So now you have to meet the energy demands in India and other places, you have natural resource exploitation happening in places like Guyana. In the same way that, for example, what the U.S. has done is really create rivalries, especially because of the solidarity movements that were growing for Gaza. You see other fighting that is happening in Sudan. And you also see these feuds between Venezuela and Guyana where they've kind of escalated. You also see the Mexico-Ecuador situation also escalating. And so these are basically problems that didn't exist except for the U.S. basically giving support to one side over the other, where things had really had a status quo. And so I think that's really a real cause for alarm. It's not just the possibility of violence in the Middle East, but how the U.S. is pushing confrontations all around the globe.
Okay, on that note, we're going to take a station break and come back on the other side with an interesting piece of video. Okay. Welcome back to a conversation with El-Hajj.
Listening to Salman Media, your humanitarian broadcaster. Send forward and send kindness to those who've lost their homes and been plunged into poverty. For those who are a meal away from starvation, a food parcel means an entire family can eat this Ramadan. That's the power of food. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, why did I ever get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include sunflower, sugar friends to the sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally commercial free and approved by the Orphan Food Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunflower, now when you're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it's an only name, and who it's not. No clean away from home. And that is the ideal package for families, business people, and sports with its one-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities.
And other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaitlodge.co.za.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty. Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, bakkies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Mauri Saalakhan. I am again pleased to be your host, and I have a special guest with me today, Dr. Nadia B. Ahmed. Dr. Nadia, Thomas Jefferson had a very interesting observation that he made. And I imagine he made this in the wee hours of the night. Well, before we share this observation, there's a piece of video I want us to see.
Lincoln, we want to go home. We don't want to camp outside your house. We don't want to camp outside your house, Lincoln. Full ceasefire, then we'll leave. Lincoln, full ceasefire. Get back.
Okay, before the break, you mentioned, subhanallah, here again, I'm having one of those moments. Well, let me get back to the thought I was about to make before we saw that piece of video. Jefferson had an observation that he made that is inscribed on the wall of his memorial. The quote is, "I tremble for my country. When I reflect, God is just. His justice cannot sleep forever." You know, I've referenced that quote so many times over the years that it's just a part of my memory bank without me having to make any effort. I tremble for my country when I reflect, God is just. His justice cannot sleep forever. When I first saw that quote, I was curious about it. Where did this come from? And I did a little research and found out that he wrote this in a letter to a very, what I imagine was a bosom friend, someone, you know, close to him. And I imagine when he wrote these words, it was probably in the wee hours of the night when he was all alone with his conscience, with the contradictions that this new fledgling democracy was already expressing, and the role that he and other front runners played in it. I mean, bear in mind the fact that while he was given credit for being one of the foremost authors of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and we hold these truths to be self-evident, he was a slaveholder. I mean, he's mired in contradiction. So I'm I believe that this observation was made, like I said, in the wee hours of the night when he was alone with his conscience and those contradictions, but he spoke the truth. With that being said, You referenced Blinken. That was the thought that came to mind before the break. You referenced Secretary of State Blinken. And we just saw a little piece of video of Blinken being hounded on Capitol Hill by citizen activists, by engaged in a lobbying effort. My next question to you is, how important are those types of efforts that are being made as we speak on Capitol Hill and in other corridors of political power throughout this country?
I think those are the most essential actions that we can be doing, those types of disruptions, because what you see, for example, like those actions that were led by Code Pink and other coalition groups, is that they have a specific media effect. And even if the media ignores them, they get played out on social media. And so the algorithms of social media cannot ignore what is happening in those images. And what you also see, for example, is you see a playing out of what the Israeli Defense Forces are doing in Gaza, because a number of police forces, including the New York Police Department and the Los Angeles Police Department, were trained by IDF forces. They're bringing that same level of violence to peaceful protesters in the U.S. So, for example, just a week ago, there was a protest in Lake Yola Park in Orlando, and the police started using tear gas. And they also ended up spraying tear gas on small children who also just happened to be there as well. And so they're really kind of seeing a level of barbarism that you haven't seen in the protest. And just to kind of put it in perspective, Brown University has a cost of war project. And really, people are putting their bodies on the line when they are involved in this, because even the Capitol Police have become very violent in their arrest. And they didn't do these types of arrests before. If anybody had demonstrations, they would essentially, give them a citation or warning, and then they would have them on their way. But now they're really doing very vehement arrests, and people are complaining that they're just kind of walking by and they're being arrested. There's about 940,000 people who died post 9/11 due to direct war violence, and there was about 3.6 to 3.8 million people who died as an indirect result of post 9/11 war zones. And so the death count is well over 4.5 million people who have died. And you have also seen the creation of about 38 million refugees. And the U.S. has spent over $8 trillion on the war since post 9/11. And then it has also conducted its counterterrorism activities in 78 different countries. So this is really quite expansive in terms of what the United States has been doing and is doing. And this is what Thomas Jefferson is really warning about this happening. And I think we just have to kind of pause and really reflect on this, on these numbers, but also think about what will happen if we don't. Like, how many more people are going to die? And for me, like, I've just been wondering, is there a kill number? Like, how many people have to die? Like 40,000 people have died so far. And I remember I was working on an article about military carbon emissions, and as I've been updating it and including the increased death count, I started off writing 9,000 at one point, edited. Then it was 20,000, 30,000, and 40,000. It's like the number just keeps going up. Is it like the number has to be 60,000? The number has to be 100,000, 200,000 people that have to die in the modern era, where people are just not going to care at all. And I think that's why these protests that are happening are probably the most essential thing that can happen. And not only the protest on Capitol Hill, but to also do direct action events that also are going to be leading to arrests, and also trying to do disruptions of other types of events that has also been effective. The encampments were quite remarkable into seeing the breadth at which they had developed. The first thing that you saw happening on April 15th, there was actually a strike for Gaza. day that had been announced where people stayed home and didn't go to school or work on that day. And just 2 days later, on April 17th, you had the Columbia encampment put up. A few days later, other encampments were also put in place. And that basically just kind of built up momentum. And so the last I saw, there was like over 150 different encampments. The number is probably going to increase to 200 or 300 going forward. And then when school starts back again in the fall, there'll probably be more of a resurgence of these encampments if the violence is going to continue. And the other thing that we've seen is just a massive crackdown on the violence because it is problematic for the Biden administration to have all of these protests happening because it shows that President Biden is not in control, and it goes against this idea of law and order. And so former President Donald Trump kind of seizes on that momentum and then shows that, President Biden doesn't have things in control. And so that's why the administration and the White House have been very violent in having a crackdown because it's bad for the optics. You also see like a resurgence of violence that happens around elections and a heightened level of anti-Muslim bias that is perpetuated as a result of that.
Indeed. You are a professor yourself. What are you seeing and hearing on your campus? And what you're seeing at home as well as nationally and globally on these college campuses in these activist activities, not just involving students, but increasingly also involving faculty. How is this impacting the consciousness and from your perspective, sister?
Yeah, I would say like I feel in some ways I'm leading like a double or triple life because at one point I'm like a law professor at a non-public institution in Florida, which is a Catholic institution. So for me, I like there's been a lot of crackdown on progressive voices in Florida. Because there's a Republican governor in place. And at the same time, since I teach at a Catholic institution, the Pope has been very clear in his condemnation of this violence and it calls for peace. So I feel like I have more freedom and I also have tenure. So I don't feel limited in that way. But I do feel somewhat constricted because even in the Muslim space, there's like this anti-intellectualism that occurs. And so there's also a fear in the Muslim community about speaking up, where I think that also has to happen more. And I think in a lot of the other cities, for example, in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, or New York, like major metropolitan areas, even in Houston and Dallas, the community has been more involved, but like in the South, especially in Florida, it's still the deep South, still like considered part of the Bible Belt. So I think there's some concern around that as well. And at the same time, I'm also a doctoral student at Yale University. And so the difference between the administration is really night and day. Whereas I had administrators at Barry University, like small unranked school, reach out to me and ask for my concern and my opinion about things. Whereas at Yale, it's just very like one-sided in terms of all of the communication. There was one incident where at least 50 students were arrested. At Harvard University, for example, 13 students were prevented from graduating and being able to walk. And so this is really to send a message to stop the student protests. But I also see, for example, that the faculty have also showed support in these protests. And I think for example, the UC Irvine encampment was able to be very successful because they had a convergence, not just of the students and professors working together, but also the community, especially the Muslim community, being heavily involved. The Yale encampment as well had more support from the local Connecticut Muslim community and other outside groups in terms of being able to provide food and other types of other types of essentials to those who are protesting, because it doesn't really cost that much to protest as a student. I remember the first day of the encampment, somebody was texting me from the community, can we help out? Like, how can we help out? And they came and dropped off 15 boxes of pizza. Like, that's really the level that we were at. Even right now, there's the protest that they're planning for like on the weekend, which will probably be after the broadcast happens, or before the broadcast happens when it's shown, and they're just looking for having 60 kafayas, like how they can do that. And so that's really kind of some of the basic level of organizing that is happening, and being able to support that is really important.
And as a professor with expertise in the area of law, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on, what the International Court of Justice did, and now the controversies that have erupted around the ICC prosecutors' long overdue decision to have some movement in the area of holding some of the leading Zionists in Israel accountable for what they are doing. What are your thoughts on that?
I remember when I was in law school in 2004, I took a class on international human rights. And at the time, there was a case that came up involving Augusto Pinochet, who was the ruler in Argentina. And so there had been a case that was also brought against him at the time, and there were attempts to arrest him. And so the international rule-based order is very one-sided. It was essentially put in place to make sure that Israel can exist, and that there's no threats to this Western world order. It was put in place for allowing for the continuation of the US and the UK's political spectrum, and for allowing it to continue that system. And so any threats to that system were not taken too kindly by those who are international rulemaking bodies. The way that the UN Security Council operates, the way that the US is allowed to just raise its hand and have a veto and prevent the genocide from continuing, is super problematic. And so I think that we have to kind of understand what is happening and understand the finite systems of it. So not only do we have to understand the criminal rules, but also understand the economic systems that have allowed for this disparities and development to happen. So we have to understand how trade operates. We have to also understand how commerce operates, how monetary theory and monetary systems have also been used to subordinate people in different countries. And so when we have an understanding of that, I think we can understand why there is not movement that is happening in this case in the way that it needs to be. And at the same time, if you look at the history of the world, like, ordinary people have changed the world. Like, when ordinary people have kind of gotten together and decided that they need to make some change, it's not as if they waited for some leader to come or somebody to tell them what to do. They just decided on their own to bring about that change. That change happened, especially like in South Africa. It's like ordinary people decided they wanted change, and this is what we're seeing right now happening. And so this isn't a moment to really kind of question, why are we doing this? Is it going to work or not? It's like, we need to keep putting that pressure on. We need to intensify everything that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, I would like for you to weigh in on some of the broader aspects of this this theme that we're going with today, the issues of global challenges on global justice, and share some thoughts on the stagnation that appears to be taking place with the prisoners that are still remaining at Guantanamo, and also our political prisoners right here in the United States. But we'll have your thoughts on that when we come back.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Contact Lenasia Livestock and Poultry for all your sadaqah, akika and qurbani requirements. We offer clean, hygienic abattoir style and refrigeration facilities. Sheep, goats and cows are available at competitive market-related prices, direct to the public. We slaughter, slice and distribute in your behalf. But that's not all. Introducing Meat Masters Halal Butchery, our sister company situated on our farm in Lenasia. Unbeatable prices on lamb, beef and chicken. Lenasia Livestock and Poultry. Livestock is our business. We are Sanha approved. Telephone 011 857 1774. Call now.
After the recent attacks on Gaza, many families have been displaced with their homes left destroyed. Through your donations, our teams are on the ground in Gaza, providing support and delivering necessary aid to families affected. The people of Gaza need your help. Give hope. Donate today to Penny Appeal South Africa. www.pennyappeal.org.za 031 1100 573.
We are here on the ground with many appeal organizations in Gaza.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic, Sharia, and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
In the Eastern Cape, children are facing unimaginable hunger. A baby was rescued, fed only powdered drink. A young girl lost her life searching for food. Children eat grass to survive and return to school on Mondays too hungry to learn, some even crying from hunger. Teachers and principals are giving what little they have, but it's not enough. This Ramadan, you can make a difference. Help us support Muslim families in Gqeberha and rural Eastern Cape. Together, we can feed hope, fight hunger, foster change. Donate to the Al-Fida Foundation. Send your proof of payments to admin@alfida.co.za for Section 18A tax certificates or contact us on 041 484 1288.
You South African, of course. You anxious about the future. We've got you covered. Build on your wealth portfolio with Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange. Visit us at 151 Stephen Dlamini Road, Musgrave, Durban, or call us on 031 202 4700 for more information. Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Elections are near. 2024 is a time to feel the Al-Jama'ah effect. Presently, our country faces challenges with corruption and crime being rife, poor service delivery, load shedding, and high unemployment. Al-Jama'ah is a platform that unifies communities and provides safety, dignity, honor, and protection to all. We believe in a South Africa where every citizen is employed and where leaders serve the people. You have the power to vote and shape the future. Join the Al-Jama'ah effect and let's shape a brighter South Africa together. It is your right to vote. Vote Al-Jama'ah. This advert was paid for by the political party.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Okay, welcome back to a conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. Again, I am pleased to have as our guest today Dr. Nadia B. Ahmed. She is a professor and a committed Muslima who has been doing a tremendous amount of work helping us navigate our way through the challenges that we're facing right now. While she is not present in the Washington, D.C. area, she has had quite a bit of influence in the kind of citizen lobbying that's taking place there on the Hill. She has been a very strong voice for, helping concerned citizens in this country to push back on those elements, those negative elements within our socio-political structure that are holding back the better of the two Americas. I consider our sister to be a very important voice in helping the better of the two Americas to have a chance at breathing and maybe becoming resuscitated to the point where we can save this country from itself. I'd like for you, my sister, to weigh in on Guantanamo. There are still, while the majority of prisoners have been released, in most cases, under very difficult circumstances where they are not yet able to completely breathe free. They are at least free from that hellhole that occupies part of the island of Cuba. There are still some left, but we don't hear about them at all. They're completely off the radar. What are your thoughts on Guantanamo from when it was first set up to where we are today?
I mean, like I know you asked me about Guantanamo, but I also would be remiss if I didn't mention about U.S.-Cuba relations and the economic sanctions that the U.S. has had on Cuba, which has really strangled Cuba. Like that was one hope from the Obama administration to have like better relations going forward. And really, Cuba has really stood up to the United States and its empire, and so I think that's something that's important to mention as well, is just the strain in those relationships, how those economic sanctions have been put in place. And at the same time, just kind of recognizing the resilience and solidarity of the people of Cuba for the people of Palestine. And if you go back and look at the number of people who were incarcerated in Guantanamo Bay, over 700 were released and sent back. Most of the people who were arrested really had nothing to do with anything, were just picked up off the street, given for some ransom. You had shopkeepers, bus drivers, taxi drivers, bookkeepers, just people kind of going about their day who were caught up in this broad dragnet of terror without any justification or anything. And so what the administration has done is since October of 2023, where they had been planning to actually release some more prisoners, they decided that they were going to actually hold off on that because they were concerned that what would happen. And they're also concerned about the timing of that release with the November election weighing in. So there was about 11 men who were planned. They were in the process of being released or transferred because there was humanitarian concerns with their detention status, and so even though they were either citizens of Yemen or had ties to the country, they were scheduled to in fact be resettled in Oman. And so even though the transfer is kind of still in discussion in terms of like the timing it could happen, but there's a lot of politics that have been at play behind it. I mean, if President Biden was really serious about justice, he would actually close down Guantanamo Bay. And I think also another problem that we see is that we have a lot of incrementalism that happens. For example, we focus on one or two prisoners, but what really needs to happen is we as as the progressive left, as American Muslims, need to be pushing for defunding Guantanamo completely, not just having to release. They need to move away from having that prison put in place. There was actually a paper somebody had published, another academic, saying that the Guantanamo military prison should actually be converted to a climate research center. I think you have precedent for that. For example, you have Alcatraz prison out in San Francisco that was turned into a tourist site. And so I think it would be a gesture of goodwill to either turn it into a tourist site or to turn it into a climate center. And I think the U.S. should be very serious about its leadership in the world, and it has shown no leadership in the past several decades.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And then what about our political prisoners right here on the American mainland? Just a couple of nights ago, we had at one of the largest centers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Valley Ranch Islamic Center. There was a very successful program for Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin. This was the largest assembly of concerned Muslims I have ever witnessed in all of the years, the 23 or 24 years that Imam Jamil has been wrongfully, in the view of many, including myself, imprisoned. It was a very successful event. I'm here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area because on the end of this week, we're going to have a conference on Hindutva, Zionism, and Western imperialism. And then the following day, we're going to have a rally for our sister in Islam, Dr. Afia Siddiqui, another prominent political prisoner. But there are many. I mean, there's the Holy Land 5, there's the Raleigh 7, there's the Fort Dix 5. I mean, there are just so many. Omar Ahmed Ali. I mean, there's just so many. We could just spend the next hour just listing the many political prisoners that we have, especially post 9/11 in this country. What are your thoughts on this and on the prospects for this rise in consciousness that we have witnessed in the wake of the genocide and the ethnic cleansing taking place in occupied Palestine? This rise in consciousness being able to impact these other areas of challenge on the justice front for us both here and abroad. What are your thoughts on that?
When we first connected in 2002, you were working on the Imam Jamil Al-Amin case. You had done an interview with him, and you had shared it with me. And so really, this is the same work we've been doing at that time is the same work we're still working on to this day. And I think it's important to kind of contextualize what is happening, in the sense that the United States has been exporting this militarism around the world, but it's also been exporting this carcerality around the world. So, for example, I mentioned that it's conducted counterterrorism operations in 78 different countries. The U.S. prison population stands at 2 million people right now. 2 million people in the United States are incarcerated out of a population of about over 300 million. And so in that time period, especially of the past 4 decades, you've seen a large increase in prison populations around the world. So you would think that that would be happening independently, but it's not, because what the U.S. has done is it's implemented through the Department of State and other legal systems what they call a rule of law initiative. And the rule of law initiative is how to have more prosecutions, how to make the prison system more efficient, the judicial system more efficient for incarceration, to quell dissent and any types of disruption. So this is really, the U.S. has kind of colonialized the prison experience as well, and spread it all around the world. And one of the most problematic aspects of this is that it really crushes political dissent. I would consider Imam Jamil al-Amin a political prisoner because he was someone who, from his youth, was outspoken in the 60s and onwards, was a very radical thinker. And that's something that is very much a threat to the establishment, not someone who's like going around throwing bottles and having a protest or being anarchist, but somebody who's a very deep thinker and also somebody who has a lot of clout within the Muslim space. And his incarceration really sent shockwaves throughout the Muslim community. It really made people think twice about what they want to say or do. And it really had a very chilling effect on activism among American Muslims as well as African American Muslims as well. And so that's something that I think that we need to kind of reflect on is this just broad prison system. And also in speaking with those who are formerly incarcerated or detained at Guantanamo, we also see the resilience. For example, Muhammad Oud Slahi, when he was incarcerated, like they had the movie that was made about him, The Mauritanian, he literally wrote his way out of Guantanamo. He didn't even know how to speak English, but he learned English. He befriended the prison guard. And it's just a really remarkable story. And it was made into a major motion picture. And also, if you look at the case of Muazzam Beg, who was a bookseller from the UK of Pakistani origin, his father actually put up a fight for him, and it really intervened through the UK government. Whereas in the case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui, you have also like the Pakistani intelligence apparatus that has also played a role in this. For example, in Houston and other parts of Texas, you have a lot of those expats that are based there. So I think it's important to kind of bring up those questions because people are starting to have remorse about what they did about that case. And Dr. Afia, for those of you who don't know, she really was essential in terms of mobilizing against the arms embargo in Bosnia and really leading to the interventions in the Balkans. And again, another political prisoner, somebody who was being vilified for no reason other than her political activism that went against the U.S. interests.
Indeed. Thank you so much, sister, for referencing that little bit of history as it pertains especially to Afia, given that I'm here in Texas now. And we have a rally planned for her this coming Sunday, inshallah ta'ala, on the day that this this video interview that we're doing will air. On a final note, this will be my final question, and then whatever you would like to close out with, inshallah, you can do so. You mentioned earlier, you referenced briefly the fear and trepidation that has gripped parts of our Muslim community, especially our leadership, some of our organizational leaders, etc. What would you say to them, those who have been reluctant to delve into the work that's being done now to try to bring about a change, positive change in the way that our country and other Western governments and their affiliates in the global South, what they've been doing? What would you say to those who are afraid to push back, and also importantly to those who would caution young people to be quiet, to not stick their necks out? Leaders and even parents who are understandably concerned about their young and the future of their young if they were to stick their neck out and become identified for in being among those who are engaging in this very necessary pushback. What would you say to them as a Muslim sister, as a expert in the field of law, as someone who has a very good knowledge of history and historical struggle? What would you say to these folk?
Yeah, and I wanted to add in one more thing about Dr. Afia. Former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, he had said about her case that the case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui was the worst case of individual injustice he had ever witnessed. And that's alarming because he was really at the forefront of so many international movements, from his time as Attorney General and moving forward from the Vietnam War onwards. He was somebody who, when the Iraq War was happening, he was driving around with a photographer trying to document it, to show this is what the United States is doing to innocent people in Iraq, because there was concerns even then about the freedom of the press. And I think in terms of what I would caution, especially for different leaders, I see like a big generational divide. And what I think is really problematic is that the same people who, for example, were leading communities during when 9/11 happened are still in charge now. And so I really think like the leadership needs to be anybody under the age of 35. Like even for somebody like me, someone in my mid 40s, like I'm a little bit too jaded and don't have the strength of conviction that somebody from the 35 and under crowd would have. And I think that, they can take advice and take guidance, but I think this is really a burn the boats moment. This is really, if you think about the history of Islam and the spread of Islam, you think about the story of Tariq bin Ziyad and how he essentially just burned the boats. And this is really what we have to do. The same thing that happened in South America. When the Spanish conquistadors went in, they burned the boats. And I think there's actually a management book that's taught at Harvard Business School called the same thing, Burn the Boats. And I think that really that we are just at this really critical juncture in our politics. And we really need to stand in our power in this moment. And we've just ceded too much of that power and put it at the feet of a lot of very corrupt and crony organizations that have not really looked out for the best interest of the community. And you can also see throughout the annals of history that there have been people and groups who are essentially traitors to causes of liberation and revolution. And so I think we also have to be vigilant. There's been instances where surveillance has happened within mosques where people who are basically being entrapped. And so then you have other political prisoners that are created. I think that what we really need to have happen is for people to really stand up at this moment and to stop making themselves small, just to have a seat at the table. One thing that's important to recognize is this idea that, you need to have a seat at the table, but people need to stop trying to get a seat at the table, especially for when they really need to be trying to go out there and flip that table. And that's really what we have to do, is really to be able to be very, really, really strong in our convictions when we're doing this. I think on Saturday, I actually went and disrupted a program in the mosque, like in Code Pink style. And I think because it was being hosted by a problematic organization, which I kind of warned the mosque leadership about, and they still hosted it nonetheless. And I think my comment to the imam afterward was, he was saying that I was being uncivil, but I was like, what's the alternative? And I told him in Urdu, I was like, should we just be quiet, sit in the corner and be very docile in this moment? Which is, I think, what some of our leaders want us to do, is to just kind of get along and kind of think more about their long-term survival. Whereas knowing that if we don't stand up at this moment, we're really going to have nothing left.
Well said. Okay, you just responded to my last question. Do you have any final thought you'd like to share with the listening and viewing audience?
What I would like to add, for example, I think it's really important for people to recognize that they have it within their power to make a difference. Like if anybody tells them not, that they can't do something, is don't listen to them. Like even if I'm saying something that is not right or you don't agree with, just don't listen to it. Like I think that you know what's best in your situation and what needs to happen. But I think we need to not take no for an answer. And that's what's really critical. And people say, oh, we can't stop this genocide. We can't stop the war. We can't stop this mass incarceration. We can't close Guantanamo. It's like we just need to tell them, watch us now.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have been very pleased to witness, is the number of youth that have, risen up in this moment of need. The tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, cumulatively the millions of folk who have stood up here in the United States and around the world, making the declaration loud and clear, not in our name, not in our name. The overwhelming majority of these folk have been youth. And among the youth, the overwhelming majority, from what I've seen, have been women. I have just been, I've just been overjoyed, overwhelmed with profound respect and appreciation for the folk that I have seen step up and speak out, and especially the women folk. And with that being said, I want to thank you, Dr. Nadia B. Ahmed. I want to thank you for the role that you have been playing in helping to raise consciousness and also helping to give direction. May Allah Ta'ala bless you for that. May Allah Ta'ala bless us to help this country live up to the better part of itself before it's too late. And, usher in a much, much better world. A world that respects life, and not just the lives of some, but the lives of all. With that being said, we end this broadcast as we normally do with the verse, with actually the surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihat. Wa tawassaw bil haqq. Wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you all. Thank you, Dr. Nadia, for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.